Hello, and welcome to the conference. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the conference. Instructions for Q&A will be given out at that time. However, if you have a question during the meeting, please feel free to type it in the chat Q&A pod located to the left of the presentation. At this time, I would now like to hand the floor over to Ian Scott. Ian?
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our introduction to Intercity Visits. Hope you all had a chance to check out the book that we put out at the convention already this year and are logging on some more questions about that. Today we've got a great panel to talk about Intercity Visits, a tremendous amount of experience leading different communities on these kind of visits. Leading the call today is Joan Mobley, co-author of the book with me, also president and founder of JTM Consulting. Joan's got a long background working with chambers, leading Intercity Visits, and she's worked with chambers all across the country to put together these programs. Also on the call are Bob Quick and Linda Grabowski from Commerce Lexington. Commerce Lexington's got one of the longest histories of leading inner-city visits in the country, and they've actually been on these visits for 69 years as an organization. So they've got a long history of success with these and can talk about them from a number of different angles. So welcome, Joan, Bob, and Linda, and I'll hand it off to Joan.
Thanks, Ian. Hello, everyone. It's good to have you with us, and we're looking forward to a lively discussion. We thought we would set the stage a little bit and kind of give some background on doing inner-city visits. And I see from the list of participants, we have a number of folks who've been doing them for a number of years, and I hope that you'll bring your wisdom and expertise to the table and discussion as well as we move into this conversation. We're going to begin by just defining what an inner-city visit is, and this is purely for our discussion today. We, in a most generic definition, would be that it's a group that regularly schedules a visit from one community to another, and the other characteristic is that it's a delegation that represents the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. As I'm sure you know, these trips can take many forms, but for our discussion, we're going to be focusing on that definition. Often we get asked, why do an inner-city visit? And there really, as we've looked at it, are two sort of segments from a community development perspective, which really relates to the issues, the opportunity to identify and support and engage a leadership delegation around best practices and lessons learned as it relates to specific issues that you've defined. The other is the high-level networking, the bridge building, the trust building that really causes the trip to be successful. And I guess I would ask Bob and Linda, is there anything else you'd want to add to that in terms of why you all have done it and why you continue to do it every year?
No, I think those, to me, capture the essence of what we gain on our trips and the value of them. So I think as we break those down, that'll probably capture most of what we're looking for.
Okay, wonderful. Sharing with you a piece that Lexington puts together, and we'll reference this a couple of times in our conversation, but this really, every year, they add to their list the successes that they've had in the important areas that have been influenced by the inner-city visits. So this is something that if you download this presentation is something that may become a resource to you as you try to convince folks as to why do this, because there are really tangible results. Question is what you will need in order to really undertake this venture. And we look at it on sort of two levels, the community capacity to do it as well as the organizational capacity. When you look at the community capacity, there's a series of questions that you might ask yourself in order to determine where you are in this process. And first, is your organization best suited to host the trip? And if you are the organization that can extend the invitation, terrific. If there may be others partnering with an academic institution, with a political partner, might give you the strength for an initial year venture to do this kind of trip. Can you identify key issues that challenge your community? Oftentimes, certainly when you look at the Chamber's program of work and your government affairs agenda and the issues that you're focusing on, but also looking, have you done envisioning process for your region? Has the mayor done in his State of the City address identified certain issues that are of key concern to your community? Looking at all of those will help you focus and really identify what are the issues that you would put on your short list. And if you go to those issue experts in your community around those issues, Who are they benchmarking? What are programs that they would love the leadership of your city to look at? Are there ones that stand out that would be an easy first-year pick? And can you engage a broad-based delegation of your community leaders? What time frame would work best for that leadership? And that sort of gets at the question, who can extend the invitation that no one can say no to? And then what are the financial realities for this trip? Would you see the capability of your delegates paying to be part of this? What would be the financial resources? Are there some that have deeper pockets and might be willing to host certain aspects of it and give you more financial support? And might there be a foundation that would see this as a truly valuable community development venture that would support it for its first year? Linda and Bob, anything that, when you look about from the community capacity, things that would be things to think about?
One of the things I would throw out is, even though we are the lead entity in hosting the trip and sending out the invitations, we have a very close affinity with our mayor as well as the University of Kentucky president. And the thing there is, we want this to be a true public-private. Again, we own the event, but I want them to feel like they are just as much a part of the partnership and the ownership. So when we select a site to go to, they're at the table. We also work closely with our public schools, superintendent, and others. But again, even though we may own it, I want others to feel like they're just as much a part of it. And I will say, I think that's been a big part of our success.
Great, thank you. Okay, if we then move to the organizational capacity, and this is really looking at, from sort of the human resource perspective, looking at first the leadership support. It's critical that, as you hear from Bob, the CEO is absolutely, this is something he or she sees as an important new venture for your organization. And then the leadership of the board, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be out there making the ask, gaining support, signing that letter of invitation. So you've got to be sure that everybody sees this as a valuable, indeed, initiative to begin. Then to look internally, there really are a number of things to look at the capacity. I look at the senior staff issue expert. It's really the person who is going to oversee and coordinate the program. And this person, though they may not have personally the expertise in transportation or downtown development, he or she knows exactly who to get to, how to get clarity around that issue, and how to engage those issue experts into the conversation. There's also a strong need for administrative support. This is a data-heavy program in keeping things on track and keeping the many pieces of that puzzle put together. Linda, do you want to talk a little bit about that, since you certainly have so many years of logistical expertise?
Sure. I mean, it's certainly an undertaking for the staff, and it's a matter, in our chamber, the time that we pick for the trip, and it's been a time frame that we've had for many, many years, so of course the attendees are used to it, but we are as well, and can work our other programs around it. It's obviously staff intensive for many months, and if you're a sizable group. But we put our event division and many others on this project pretty heavily for several months. And if I was looking at starting a trip, and I'd be glad to, again, help anybody as they're moving forward to sort of look at who you can dedicate to that for a good chunk of their time.
Great, thank you. I think there's also, when you look at other staff participation, and again, this depends on the size of your organization, the opportunity to bring in the communications folks, if you have a design group within your staff, your economic development people, your issue experts internally, that can, again, be part of divvying up this work so that it can be done.
I just want to emphasize that from our standpoint, we're a chamber of about 2,200 members. We have 22 staff, but you don't have to, and I know there's many chambers and several on here that are bigger than we are. Don't let the size of your staff scare you as far as doing a trip, because we've worked with several who've come to our community, very small staffs. In their case, obviously the leadership, volunteer leadership stands up, but I think the value of these are so, the takeaway, the value add is so good for your membership and for your community that you can make them work. So just don't get caught off guard if you hear from a chamber who talks about how big their any difference. It's how you put it together, and it's getting the right resources, staff-wise and volunteer-wise, to make them work.
Well said.
And I'd also like to add that I think that there's two different levels of staff involvement. One, the heads of the different divisions, economic development, workforce development, leadership, public policy, we want them at the table during the planning process so that their departments and their perspectives and the work that they do in the chamber is well represented when we're putting together the agendas and the focus. That's different than the implementation staff that we sort of have on the ground to make sure that everything is pulled off. And obviously everyone that goes on the trip has some assignments in order for us to manage our group on the ground. But there's two levels, setting up the trip and the agenda and the focus, and then implementing the trip. So we use them in a combination of those two levels.
Great.
There will always be challenges, and I'll share one we're dealing with. The success of our event, we've gone from 140 participants 8 years ago to 275 this past year, and the challenge we run into is, you can imagine with the delegation at large, a lot of people want to be involved in putting it together. And that's a real challenge because we're trying to, from a staff standpoint, keep it much smaller and keep our groups on. So anyway, you can witness from the beginning or after you've been in a year or two the success, the popularity of it can cause you some issues. So you've got to stay on top of it as it grows and as it gains lots of popularity, as it will.
Bob, that's a great transition into sort of laying the foundation, as we call it, and really defining your goals as the first step, which really does speak to what you've just defined. What is it that, as you define this program the first year out, what would be your goals, both internal and external? And internal might be that you have the capacity to do one bus, 55 people. That's the goal for this first year venture. And other internal goals might have to do with membership development, might have to do with visibility for the organization. And then your external goals could relate to the issues, the engagement of a broad-based leadership team from your community, a series of things. But giving thought to that ahead of time really helps you in defining what this program is going to be the first year out. And then to really think about establishing policies. And this list is not necessarily complete. It's just there to give you suggestions of the kinds of things that you need to think about ahead of time before you go public, because it really helps you not have to kind of go, oh, well, let's go think about that, and then you don't have the opportunity to think about it with this clear ahead sometimes when you've got other people sort of pulling at you to make a decision in there as they think it should be made. But such things as non-transferable invitation. Some communities have a wide open invitation. It is listed in their publications, and they may go through a Tier A list first to get a round of invitations on the front end so that they are reserved spots for sure. Others have a very clearly defined list that is limited in number and reasons for why that person is invited. Non-transferable, meaning that they can't decide their company should be there, so they'll send their marketing person. It really is intended to be the decision maker, the person that can influence the change that you hope to bring about for your community. The everyone pays to play. Again, are you going to do scholarships? Are you going to deal with political leadership in any different way than everybody else? Things that relate to the fee for this, again, to be thought about. Refunds, again, it's an issue to be thought about. It usually relates to the contract deadlines and obligations that you have so that you're not left holding that expense without some way to cover it. Spouses, are they invited? Can they come? If they ask you, is that a piece that you want to have as part of this? In-kind trade for registration fee, again, being sure that you're, from your accounting perspective, that really is a value for you. Airline seating sounds silly, but clear up front, we're not assigning anybody, or if you charter, will you assign people? So again, things to think about. Uninvited guests, what if somebody who isn't on your list heard about it and calls? What's going to be your policy, and who's going to be the person talking to them about it? The other thing for... Huh? Any other thoughts there? Bob and Linda?
I think you're right on. I'm sure everybody develops a few other unique ones here and there, but you pretty much captured. I think we deal with many of those each year because people always try to, again, as it becomes popular and it sells out, people try to push the rules and modify them for their own value.
Right.
Don't emphasize it, and it's so good to see this highlighted, but establishing that stuff on the front end, we have not deviated much from some of our policies, and it saves us an awful lot of grief in the long run. So absolutely give that some good time.
Let me throw out one that we've struggled with is we will absolutely have people who will arrive. They will make other hotel reservations because the Four Seasons in Austin this year, we had 96% or 94% of the rooms. So people will show up even if you don't have capacity for them.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Creating buy-in. I think, again, if you, year after year, well, for the initial year, it really is understanding what this program is. If you look at the guide that ACC produced, there's some great case studies there that talk about the value. There's some wonderful quotes from your peers that talk about the value of doing this. So it really is getting to those people to demonstrate how this can be valuable to the community, pieces such as the one Louisville has shared with you all. Oftentimes there's certainly the involvement of a volunteer advisory committee, and I think if you were to talk to everyone that does this across the country, they use them in different ways. Some may use them in the beginning to generate the marketing and participant development, to really spread the word and get people engaged. There may be value in having issue experts around the table that can help you from a non-staff perspective bring resources to the table. They might oversee the agenda. They may help with the sponsorship development. Whatever it is, and if you choose to use the committee, being clear about what their role is and how they can benefit you would be, again, doing it on the front end makes it very clear, and doesn't mean it can't change each year. Linda, do you have any thoughts on that?
We are, and Bob sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier, one of our challenges now as this trip becomes so much bigger and more key in our community is the people that want on the planning committee, and it's becoming too large to be effective. So we're dealing with that now, and we've got to make some probably tough decisions about cutting it back. I wish we had a more defined plan already in place, and that would have saved us this, but I don't think we ever expected it to get like it has. But we have two levels of volunteer advising, so this is just information. If you're starting a trip, you may or may not need this, but we have a small group that helps select the city, and we implemented that this year because we're getting so big. We probably need a short list a little bit longer. And I like that. I feel that it's something we can go, when people wonder why we pick a city or how we make selections, to be able to say that the university president's office is involved, that the mayor's office is involved, and that our key leaders on the chairman level are involved. I like that, and I feel that that answers that question well. Then I have a broader committee that helps develop the agenda. That's the one that's getting a little bit too big. But those are the two levels of volunteer that we use right now.
And I think, too, over time, some communities start with an advisory committee, and as the trip moves into sort of its regular routine, the role falls off or changes or shifts. So good advice, Linda. Thanks, in terms of how you all do it.
Let me throw out one other thing about destination selection. And Linda, please make sure that I describe this correctly, but it seems like the closer we've been to our community, for example, when we were 3.5 hours away going to Nashville, we had a little bit more trouble because a lot more people drove, and so not as many. Some people would pop in the session and pop out because they had their own wheels to take them where they needed to go. We have found that when we kind of capture our audience, where we're far enough away from home that obviously everybody goes on the plane or makes their own transportation plans to get there, fewer drive, there's fewer interruptions. Of course, cell phones and BlackBerries is the new game today, but we just find that when we get further away, we just tend to have a much better event with fewer distractions.
I'd agree with that.
We had one question, or just a point of clarification, and I want to be sure that everybody is on the same page. The types of visits we're talking about is taking the delegation from the one community to another community. It's an outbound visit, so that everyone from your invitation list of your chamber, your community, goes to another part of the country. We say intercity because it usually becomes an identified center core city that is the partner in producing this, even though you may pull from a region and pull from a variety of smaller communities that come together for the actual agenda. So I'm hoping, Lori, that clarifies your question. Shoot me another note if it doesn't, okay? Moving on with the sort of laying the foundation, identifying the key issues. We talked a little bit earlier about using the program of work, your mayor's State of the City visioning process that may have identified goals. You have, I would bet, or even doing a focus group among your top leadership of the board. What are the issues we're facing if you haven't undertaken that kind of process? The invitation list, again, we've talked about that a little bit, getting clear about who you're going to invite, why. Oftentimes, chambers will identify an ABC list. In other words, if you were to sit down and invite the top 100 people, hoping you'll get 50, that may be the list you send out first. And then you grow from there based on the issues and based on the diverse representation you want from your organization. Timing of the trip, again, taking a look at your series of things to look at. Certainly, how will this information that you glean from this trip feed into your program of work? Will it be under the leadership of your chair-elect, so it will then move into his or her agenda for the next year? Would a fall timing for that trip make sense? When we surveyed the membership of ACCE, certainly the majority were in the fall, but it doesn't mean it can't be any time of the year. It's just, again, looking internally as to what makes sense and what's in competition within your organization. As Linda said earlier, this takes a lot of time, and you don't want it on top of your annual meeting, probably. Your events people might not be happy. Destination selection, and I think Bob and Linda have talked a little bit about that. Again, sort of the thought is to go to your issue experts around the issues you've identified and say, who are you tracking? Who do you benchmark against that if you had 100 people from this community seeing what they have done, it would move the agenda ahead for you? That goes on your short list. So anything, Bob and Linda, to add to any of these pieces in terms of laying the foundation?
The resurgence of ACCE when we go to the meetings now, it's so much more refreshing because now we can talk to a lot of the other chambers that we know do inner-city visits and learn about where they've gone and why. For a while, Linda and I would struggle a little bit on trying to identify those communities that had some of the same issues that we did or themes we were trying to learn from. So I give a lot of credit to ACCE and a lot of the different programs, especially the national conference we go to, because this has become such a bigger issue or bigger opportunity. And but what I would say is through ACCE and others, you can find about those unique communities that maybe are not known nationwide, and you can learn an awful lot from those communities through their innovation.
Indeed.
And building on that, Bob, I just wanted to let everybody on the call know we'll come to slides at the end of the presentation with resources that ACCE has for people conducting inner-city visits. But one of those is a chart that outlines where various chambers have gone over the past 5 years. So we've got a long list of potential destination cities and the chambers that have visited those cities. So as you're looking at potential places connecting to your chamber peers in those cities, it can be a valuable resource to look at what they put on their agenda in that destination. And we're here to help you with that. So we'll touch more on that a little bit later in the presentation.
Great. We'd like to move now into questions, and these questions that you see up on your screen, we sort of pulled from the surveys that we did and the kinds of things that people were asking in terms of what were barriers or what were things that would be helpful to you if indeed you wanted to undertake this venture. But before we get into answering these, I'd love to open it up and see if you can, give us questions, and then we'll put them out and provide answer. Okay, I'm looking here. Okay, so I have to click here. Okay. I have a question that says, I assume you engaged the other community down the road in today's presentation. Oh, okay. Okay. We're technically trying to do this. Do you ever send a preliminary group to case the prospective cities before you make a final decision? I would say yes. I've done that. No, I shouldn't say. Usually the research and zeroes in on one city. I've had two situations where we've actually gone in on the first site visit, and it has not panned out to be what we expected, and had to regroup and then make another selection. Linda? Bob?
I'll pipe in on that, Joan. We have not since I've been here, have we done a visit prior to selecting the city, and that's sort of a time and resource situation, because when we finish a trip, we are either very close or have already or are on that trip announcing where we're going next. Then we do the site visit. Somehow that seems a little bit backwards. We have not had the situation where we've had to change our minds, although we feel like that's exactly what we would do if we found that accommodations weren't suitable. But there's my process for doing research on the city, or our process now that we're collective with a larger group, is I use the research department at the Chamber to help me get lots of stats and rankings. Rankings are very important, and we've got suggestions from people who know a lot about those cities. And then this might answer a question, Laura's question that's coming up as well. I have kind of an interview form that I use that covers the broad topics generally in our community, and then the specific topics that we're looking at that city for, and try to interview someone at that chamber. Typically is where we call to get that information, and pull out initiatives and things that are going on in that community, and that's what we use for our report to the board as they're selecting and voting on the city. So we've not had to do a visit prior to announcing it.
Yeah, I think if you look in the guide, there are some websites that have been identified as potential, as tools to use in gathering that research, that when you sit down and create a profile of the city that you're looking at, and again, there's a discussion in the guide about the kinds of things that you sort of, to do the first scan of what are the limits within population, what size metropolitan area are you looking at, multi-county, surrounded by an ag belt, does it have a university, does it have a health center, what are the key elements that are going to make a good match for who you are, to then go see how another city is doing what they're doing. If you're a city of 100,000, you may not want to go on your first trip to a metropolitan area that has 3 million people. It may, a city itself that has 3, it just may not be a good fit. So if you can make some of those specific, profile definitions, then you can begin to use some of the resources, the websites that are out there that can give you profile data on various communities. And there's many of them out there.
One thing I would add, Joan, to that, in researching for the book and interviewing various chambers, one model I heard a couple times was that chambers like to select a city that looks like them in about 10 years to kind of prospect out in terms of their growth and where they're headed, and that number seemed to come up a number of times. We want to go someplace that resembles where we hope to be in terms of population growth in about 10 years.
Right.
Is that?
I think so, but I also think it is so issue-driven, so that when I say population and geographic location and other things, does climate play? Those are sort of one piece of it, but the issues drive it. So if you're really looking at, you're a community of a certain size that is looking as to whether you can incorporate light rail as part of a multimodal transportation system, that's going to be where you start, looking at who's been doing good work around that, and then take the other pieces that follow. Okay, let's move on to...
The question is, when do you get the other chamber involved?
We do right at the beginning, when the research is being done, and you want to get a profile of that community, they may be for your short list, a point of calling and saying, we're looking at your community, what can you tell us about these issues? Once the decision is made, then they become, at least for the work that I do, they become one of your key appointments on the first site visit that brings together the Chamber staff perspective, their issue expert perspective, and just to be seen as a partner with you in doing this. Not to labor them with the work of making your agenda, but for them to be a resource to you in the process. Linda, same for you all?
Well, what I would share, and Linda can add to this, is that in some communities it may not be the Chamber that you work most closely with. It may be the Convention Visitors Bureau, or it could be the mayor's office. There could be another point within that community you work with. So that was a bit of a surprise to me, because I thought every chamber would be jumping up and down to help us, and it's not always that way. And that's okay.
No, it's not, and I think those bases all should be covered in terms of the point of entry for the first site visit, exactly, to determine where is your strongest partner in making this happen.
Right. Actually, I'm on a site visit right now for our next trip, and the people that we meet on this trip, typically it starts with the Chamber, and there are almost always have been our best resource. But you'll find experts in different areas when you do your site, and you'll find those people that just are real excited and know all about it, and they tend to be the people that help you identify the speakers and all sorts of stuff. So it can come from multiple sources.
Okay.
Montgomery, have we taken care of your question about how receptive communities are to...
And let me throw out another interesting... I heard from a chamber who said when they contacted a chamber in a very significant city in the U.S., a very popular one, that the chamber had started charging to help. So, again, just don't be caught off guard if you run into different scenarios that you may take a little bit negative. If the chamber, for example, just for whatever reason is not the right spot, don't give up on that community if it has the things that you want to focus on. There are many other points of contact that you can work through.
And I don't want to pick one point apart too much, but the chambers are always very pleased to hear that they're being visited. But the other folks you meet in the community are the ones that get really excited, and that makes things very fun. The hotels get excited. When you tell people what you're doing, if they're not used to it or they've not participated in one in their own community, they really tend to roll out the red carpet. It's such a compliment to a community that you would bring a whole delegation from your city to study what they're doing well, and they really rise to the occasion on that. We have found almost overwhelmingly that people jump through hoops to help us that's why we get the key speakers and the main leaders, and it makes the whole trip. I think you'll find more often than not they're really excited that you're coming.
Indeed. I think that is absolutely the situation I've run into over many years, for sure. We have a number of questions that relate to sort of establishing the fee, how is it a revenue generator, all the questions around sort of the financial aspect of it. For the first-year venture, I would say the recommendation is to set a break-even budget where you're not intending to put anything back to your administrative costs, that the Chamber is committing the staff to the project, and that when you do a first budget, and if you look again in the guide and on the ACCE website, you can download a version of a budget that has all the pieces that could be included, the kinds of things to think about in doing the venture that we define as 3-day, 2 nights. And you may, and what has happened, and we have Denver on the phone, and boy, they are one of the best at really raising revenues to put toward their organization. I never say profit because you never cover every hour that it takes to do this and the cost of that, but it certainly, as a program that is a value add for membership, you are putting back dollars to cover the overhead. And There's discussions both in one of the articles that Ian will share with you at the end and in the guide talking about how you can underwrite every little component of this program, from baggage tags to, the back cover of the pocket guide. All of those things can have someone's name on them, and they could have a value to them. So take a look at those resources. I think they will give you some opportunity to get specific in that area. So it says here, how do you feel... Where am I? How do you deal with negative press and news coverage relating to the event? This may come primarily from elected officials and or editorials which imply that these trips are boondoggles. I think, and believe me, it is, I always say to myself, if this were on the front page of the paper, this agenda were there, what would they say? And Linda, I love your comments, and Bob's on this too. I always say that this trip is back-to-back learning. It is clear from the agenda that there is very little time, and in fact the biggest complaint you'll get in a survey is we want more free time. And I think the response should be, well, we're not on this trip for free time. We're on this trip to learn. They can opt to sleep in if they choose, but that's not the purpose of the trip. Having a very strong, very packed agenda, very clearly identified with the leadership from that community speaking to your delegation, helps you deal with that. Media can be along for the trip. They actually can chronicle the trip. And they can be your partner in sharing the good stories and the good opportunities. Linda, Bob, any thoughts on that one?
Interesting enough, we, as of 2 years ago, our newspaper does a blog. And so they've really stepped up to promote the trip. And some people don't want the media on the trip, so they can have more open conversation. We've chosen to have them there and to engage in them. We also have a business newspaper, Business Lexington, that's there, and they are just coming up with more and more ideas how to promote it. I think as the media, as television, we used to have a TV station that traveled with us and reported live at times. I don't think you should be afraid of the media, and I think the more you send back home so that others can see what you're doing, I think it kind of takes away any of the criticism that the citizens may have. 2 years ago, though, we did have a situation where the first article from on our blog from our newspaper reporter was very negative about all the council members going and all the money being invested. Unless Linda heard something since then, it actually, I think the community had bought into the value of the trip, and it really didn't hurt us. And from that point on our trip, every article was very positive.
Right. Thanks, Bob. It is, again, back to that. The giving thought ahead of time of how you want to deal with media allows you, before you go public, allows you, again, to really think about it and have a policy in place. Doesn't mean you can't change it and alter it, but at least you've given it some thought.
I would go back to one of the original comments. I think that can be taken into consideration when you decide who is going to be the organization that plans it. Obviously, it's the chamber planning it, and we love having our city council there, and we think that we provide an experience that's far from a boondoggle. But if it was the city planning it, they'd have a bigger issue than us planning it. So we're a safer place to be able to be putting that on. We hope that they can go, and so far they can justify those budgets to do that. But we are a private organization, so.
Okay, thank you. One other question, has anyone attempted an international city visit? Yes, indeed. Many chambers do that. After they've done it for a number of years, they then undertake going across the borders. Oftentimes the first is a venture into Canada or into Mexico, but then oftentimes, as Seattle has done for a number of years, they do both an intercity visit as well as an international study mission. So we're going to be looking on the website to be adding a component around international visits. They offer some additional challenges and opportunities, so certainly look for that going ahead. The last question we have up here is there any financial sharing of the revenues? And I think that depends on the partnership and how you structure it. In most cases, as the chamber being, or one organization being the lead and handling all of the logistics and arrangements, that becomes their budget to manage and the revenues, that if there are any, to go back to the organization. I have worked where we have partnered two organizations together, and there was a pre-agreed amount of revenue sharing that would take place at the end. It was a partnership between the Chamber and the Convention Bureau, and both put resources into the process, both from a staff time and from some sponsorship dollars, so it made sense to make that happen. How many people would generally attend? Oh, where am I? Would attend an international study mission? Usually the groups are smaller, at least has been my experience. But again, I think it depends on what your goals are and what the capacities you have to deal with. You may all have been introduced to a trip to China that is being coordinated by a gentleman that does this in cooperation with the Chinese government, and they take hundreds of people at a time. And it's a very different experience. It is the revenue back to the Chamber is done to offset the marketing time you invest. It's a very interesting program. It is referenced in one of the articles on making the trips profitable. So that may be, something to look at too. It's an international offering that is doesn't cause you to have to dedicate much staff time to it as a first-time venture as a trial. But so, are there any other questions, Ian? Anything that, or Bob and
well, Joe,
you want to add? And
one thing to that. Last year, I went with the Greater Louisville Inc. Chamber to Dublin, Ireland, and I know on the front end they typically have, well, in a typical leadership trip, they usually have 140 to 160 people. They were very nervous about going overseas, and they ended up having 80 people. They were hoping for 50, and I think they ended up having 83 people go to Dublin. It was an incredible experience, and they had on that trip every key CEO you could imagine of their large corporations and their small. So my only point would be, if you're a chamber who's done these trips, don't be afraid of the international part of it, because, again, I think there was a whole excitement, especially from some of their higher-level folks, to participate in a trip like that.
Right. Okay, I'm going to look at, let's go down these questions just to see if there were any other. I'm going to go back for a second, because it's how do you keep the program interesting? It's kind of interesting to me when I think about different ways these programs can come together. And, Bob, you referenced that the one you were just with for Louisville, they created tracks and the opportunity for people to self-select if they wanted to go in a certain direction, smaller groups, and certainly with that large delegation, that may be the choice. The first year out, you may use a variety of formats that can, in keeping it interesting, that add diversity and variety of offering for the group. We use something that we call topic tables, which bring in issue experts over a meal function that allow a lot of things to be discussed in very small, intimate kind of learning situations. The ability to divide them into subgroups and take smaller groups out to see different things that then create the opportunity for people to self-select along their interests. The one thing I would say, though, is that part of the value of doing these groups with the diverse delegation is that you don't want to always be preaching just to the choir around an issue. So you want the arts people to hear the transportation presentation because you want them to be an advocate for the transportation agenda that you have, not to see it in competition with their work, but to figure out a way that they can be in partnership with that work. So it is a balancing act to be able to, figure out the which way to do it and what combination. And it may be the first year that you keep everyone together because you're building that sense of cohesive team, and then over successive years add different program formats that can keep it interesting and keep it a little bit different. Bob and Linda, any thoughts on that?
You're right when you say it's a balancing act. We really try to balance free or elective time, basically, when they can choose to do some of our activities versus general session time. Some folks want to be sun up to sundown and session after session, and some people say lighten up a little bit. We want to see something in the city we came to as well. So I think it's just a good blend, and every year we try to add something a little bit new. And a little bit on that point, one of the things I ask our speakers to do, because you pointed out that audience, even though the arts person, rather than them only looking at the arts features of a city, it's so beneficial when they all hear the same collective message, is I ask the speakers to really bring their comments around to why it's important to the group sitting in that room. Maybe you're not in public education, but why is public education important to your pocketbook or your small business or your utility or whoever you represent? And they've done a really good job of doing that, and I think people leave the room and they get why they were in that session and heard that and what their responsibility is to that issue in our community.
And that brings me to something you just said, Linda. Linda taught me early on in this thing, you can have the right issues, but if you have the wrong presenters, you can lose your enthusiasm real quick. And one of the things that having an advanced team go, and I know Linda and Katie from our staff are in Madison, Wisconsin right now, scoping out our 2009 trip, but if you do not find those right presenters, then you have to really do a thorough job. You have to find those right contacts when you hit the ground through their chamber or other sources. If there's one thing you really focus on, it's finding the right people.
And I can't agree with you guys more, because I think through the pre-visits, the opportunity to interview each person who's going to be a presenter is absolutely ideal. You don't always get that opportunity because someone can't do it and you then are doing things by phone. The other thing, though, we talked earlier about who's your partner in doing this, and when you do the first site visit, invariably, I don't know if you find this, Linda, but I do, I find someone who really is willing to work with us, and we will say, we need somebody to give us a read, because Jim Smith might be fabulous in terms of his content, but he is the deadliest speaker in the world, and we need someone to tell us that. And I've had situations where, I'm sure you have too, where somebody has just, put everybody to sleep that first night because they are boring as can be. But you do your best.
We've been really lucky. I feel like we've just had such luck in finding the right people. But, again, that goes back to, I have found overwhelmingly that the people that are helping me in the community are so flattered that we're there. They really want to help you find the right person that has the passion for whatever the issue is and the ability to do it. So I've found that to be not as much of a struggle as you might think it could be.
And ask that chamber that you're going to their community, ask them who has been there. For example, in Madison, the Springfield, Missouri chamber just concluded a leadership trip there. And so what we're doing now is we're setting up a conference call with their staff to make sure we know who the presenters are or should be.
Okay, I'm going to throw, I think it'll be just about our last question, and I'll throw it to Bob and Linda and say, what is the most daunting challenge you have had on or about an inner-city visit? And maybe to those of you that are on the line who have done inner-city visits, how would you answer that question?
Just a reminder, anybody on the call who would like to speak live with either Bob, Linda, or Joan, it's fairly simple. You just have to dial star and pound on your phone. You'll be put in a queue to ask questions live. We do have about 10 minutes left, so if there's any other questions, you can field them now.
Okay, Bob, Linda, any what's been your most daunting challenge?
I'm trying to think what it might be our daunting challenge of the day. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too recently, but right now I think we have a real challenge with our volunteer committee. We are gaining such momentum with this trip. There's a lot of entities that feel very strongly about being part of the process and almost even inserting themselves in a little bit more than they should in where we're going and what we're doing. And it's hard to handle that. We want to be inclusive and not controlling, but we still are the owner of this trip, and at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to make sure it goes well. So with the growth that we've had in a couple of years, it's presented quite a challenge in how big we get, all the different things that we do. And we've got a little faction of volunteers that are maybe being a little bit more involved than they should be. That would be a challenge I have right now. And again, going back to, I wish we had had a process all along. We didn't need it before, so we're going to have to create it. It would be easier to deal with if we had a process and where that input came from. Bob, what do you think?
I think that would be number one. Number two, and here's another one of those things to really think through on the front end, is the back end of it. You get back home, you have all these takeaways, and you get back home, how do you implement or how do you plant the seeds across the community to take advantage of what you learned or what the ahas while you were there? And by the way, we learn as much about what not to do from a trip as something that worked well. But again, it's how do you, when you get home, how do you implement the takeaways? And that may sound easy, but I will tell you every year it's a struggle just because we can't do it all, nor should we. And then how do you keep everybody organized, coordinated, and that's a challenge.
It is a challenge.
It's a huge challenge. And in reading the book that ACC has just put out, it has made me feel much better that other chambers, some think we drop the ball to a certain extent when we come back because we don't have this constant focus on the takeaways. But I'm looking at other cities, and also in talking to leaders in our community, including our mayor, maybe it's okay if our job is to present all of this and let the 200 people that are in the room take their piece and implement it in their own way. Our mayor suggested the other day on a phone call about that exactly, that he feels that there's 250 takeaways for every trip, and the chamber's not responsible for making sure that every one of those follows through, but we tackle that issue every year.
I love your mayor.
I do too. I need him to say that very publicly next time.
Yes, that's a great perspective. Great perspective. I also think that the reality is these issues that we're talking about and that we explore take time. You're not going to come home and you're not going to build a light rail system in 1 year. It's a 20-year process, as many of these issues are in looking over the long term. So it may be that your success is that you are beginning to change a mindset. That doesn't have bricks and mortar to it just yet. So any way you can capture that, indeed, is valuable. But I agree, Bob, it's a tough one. We'd like to move now. These are sort of the top 10 things that, when I think about doing this over all the years I have, and the things to sort of think about. But whatever you do the first time, you might be stuck with forever, so give it some thought. Plan on 2 pre-visit trips. I think that it makes all the sense. The first one is at the 30,000-foot level. The next one really gets you into and interviewing those people that are going to be in front of your delegation and checking out the where. Where is it you're going to hold this conversation that enhances that presentation? Interview every speaker if possible, and believe me, the speaker's assistant is your new best friend. And I use this term, I've used it for years, to be pleasantly persistent. Because they don't call back doesn't mean they don't want to talk to you. It means that you might have to make 3 phone calls to get the response you want. The email has been a godsend in terms of making that communication more efficient, but oftentimes you just have to keep pleasantly nudging to get the responses you need. Plan for advance team to go in ahead of the delegation, and that means that if your trip is a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you've got a group, probably 2 people that will go in maybe the Thursday before, run through the agenda, visit every venue, be sure that everything is in place, and if you're in a time zone change, their clock is set right so that they're ready to be full brains when the full delegation comes in. Do the staffing agenda before you leave for the trip. I know that may sound silly, but that's your brain, and you do it ahead of time, putting in every piece of information you can possibly think of. On the website, there's an example of the kinds of information that would be in that document, and then you refine it after the walkthrough because things do change. For an evaluation, suggestion is ask only the questions you want an answer to, and then what are you going to do with it? You know, if people if they give you their opinion, they want you to listen to it and then do something with it. So think about that ahead of time. Set enough time in a specific process for program debrief wrap-up. And this is always a challenge because when you start putting the agenda together, there's too much stuff. There's always more that you would want to talk about than you have time for. But it is important. You will never recapture the energy, the focus, and the enthusiasm that you have in that room with all of those people. A lot of chambers do invite everyone back within a month of coming back from the trip, and they're really lucky if they get half, they get three-quarters, it's amazing, of those delegates. So capture that energy while you have it. And you create the space. That's the role we play in making these programs come together. The delegates fill it with their energy and engagement. And never underestimate the power of bringing this level delegation together. You will be amazed at what comes out of it. And anything's possible, and you don't know if you don't ask. So if you think of it, put it out there. It just might happen. And I want to add one more that Bob and Linda added as we were talking about this, is to keep your successes in front of everyone. Every opportunity, just keep telling them how this trip has been valuable, because that really helps justify it in some people's minds and helps you grow the participation. So I'm going to turn it back to Ian. He's going to talk a little bit about the resources that we have out there available for you.
Yeah, right. We've, as many of you probably already know, we put out a guide, kind of a full book this year, a guide to inner-city visits, and it features both how-to and case studies, and should have some good information in there that might help you sell your board or sell your CEO on the idea of doing one of these visits if you think it's something that's going to be important. So if you don't have a copy, if you didn't pick one up at the convention and you'd like one, please email me. It's iscott@acce.org. I'll send you a hard copy. Or you can go on our website, acce.org/ICV. There's a whole page there with lots of resources. You can download the whole book. We've also got 3 different articles that Jones contributed to, are written about inner-city visits from various years. Learning from Inner-City Visits, which is a very kind of 101 overview that maybe touch on a lot of things that we talked about today. Making them profitable, which kind of gets more in depth on sponsorship opportunities. And then the one that was featured in actually the most recent issue of Chamber Executive, and that's the City-to-City Best Practices, which focuses on inner-city visits as a community development tool. And so that may give you some more hints about how to talk about these and frame a discussion of inner-city visits. Also on the acce.org site, you'll see a Chambers on the Move chart. Something quickly that I've put together, different chambers I've talked to, where they've been. So we've got about, I think, 45 or 50 different destination cities, organized by destination on the left side, and then you can scroll across and see who's visited and, you know, certain cities. And if you'd like to get in touch with any of the chamber folks at those chambers, any of the people who organize the visits, please give me a call. I'd be happy to help get you connected. And again, I think that Joan or Linda or myself would be more than happy to answer questions about inner-city visits, anything you can't find in the guidebook or would like some clarification on. I think either of us would be
delighted.
Be happy to help. So there are our contact details, phone and email. So if you want to make a note and jot those down, I'm sure we'd be happy to talk.
And if there are any questions that didn't get answered or things that you think of now that you get the guide and are having put you to sleep midnight reading, send them to us. We would love to be able to respond and be helpful.
Okay, are there any final questions or anything from participants on the call that we'd like to touch on before we leave? Bob, Linda, any closing remarks?
I would add one thing. Every year we're amazed of a takeaway that we never thought about, and I would just say you're going to be surprised of all the different things that you'll take from another community, but also what you'll learn from each other, from your own community. So every year we're surprised, and we have so many other things we just never thought of, which are good.
And I think that...
Can I just say... Oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, it's not all bad for them to come home saying there's no place like home and re-energize and focus on your community vision.
I was just going to add that this is the most rewarding thing, in my opinion, that we do all year long. For the staff, for the delegates, it is just such a positive when we land at the airport, people are just beaming with the experience, and it's so rewarding. It's wonderful. If you're thinking about doing it, I would launch without hesitation.
Well, thank you all so much for being part of this.
And I would invite everyone, please take the survey. If you enjoyed the call or got something out of it, or would like to give us some suggestions. Again, we said we don't ask what you don't want to know, but we do want to hear from you. Please take the survey. I'll be emailing it out, or you can click on your screen now and take the survey quickly now. But we do like to hear your feedback.
Thanks again, and happy planning.